Good evening and welcome to the Monday, December 13th, 2021, 6 p.m. regular meeting of the Bell Garden Successor Agency to the Community Development Commission. The meeting will now come to order. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 361, please be advised that members of the Bell Garden Successor Agency may participate in today's meeting telephonically. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting live online through the city's website as noted on the agenda. If any agency members should have a conflict of interest virtually, please leave the room by turning off video and muting yourself. You may still keep listening to the meeting. Tonight's invocation will be given by Councilmember Lisette Flores, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be given by Councilmember Chavez.
Okay. This is the prayer. So we just have a moment. Opening prayer. Lord, we are meeting today to conduct matters of business. Guide our hearts and our minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought, and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being a source of guidance today. Amen.
You may all rise, please. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Agency Secretary, will you please call the roll of the successor agency?
Yes, Chair. Agency Member Chavez?
Present.
Cortez? Present. Flores?
Present.
Vice Chair Pulido? Chair Barcena?
Present. Thank you. We will now move to the first item on the agenda. Public participation is now open. Agency Secretary, are there any speakers?
Looks like there's 2 attendees, so I'm going to go ahead and announce the public participation. The members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on the items listed on the successor agency meeting agenda. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the chair and agency members. Each speaker and email reading is limited to 3 minutes, subject to an overall 30-minute time period. Email comments will be read out loud after all speakers have been heard. I'll begin with the first speaker. Anyone is interested in making comments, can you please press *9 to raise your hand? It looks like there are no speakers.
Okay, thank you. Does any member of the agency wish to pull any? All right, we're now going to move to the consent calendar since there aren't any comments. And we will now ask if any member of the agency wishes to pull any items from 1 through 2 for separate discussion. Okay, seeing none, we are going to ask for a motion to approve items 1 through 2.
So move.
It's a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
So motion by Chavez, second by Flores. I'll go ahead and take it to a roll call. Agency members Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
and just for myself, so motion carries. And now we're going into discussion item number 3. Executive Director, will you please announce the discussion item?
Thank you, Chairman Barcena. This item is an annual item that seems to jump out us a little bit every year. We've got to come to the successor agency to get approval for our recognized obligation payment. So this is part of what's now a 10-year dissolution of the former redevelopment agency. So what these recognized obligation payments are the successor agency saying to the county oversight board and then subsequently to the State Department of Finance that these are obligations of the successor agency and asking for authority to go ahead and pay those obligations. That's a summary. I will turn it over to our Director of Administrative Services so he can give you a little more information to remind you of this process. always a tight deadline on this. I believe the Oversight Board is meeting the first or second week of January. And I will turn it over to Manuel Carrillo.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Before we begin, can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, as Mr. O'Kelly stated, this is the successor agency approval of the Reorganized Obligation Payment, Recognized Obligation Payment Schedule, or ROPS, for the 22-23 fiscal year. And as indicated, this is as part of the dissolution process. And of course, in February of 2012, all redevelopment agencies were dissolved and successor agencies were tasked with winding down operations. The dissolution process consists of paying down RDA obligations via the ROPS, disposing RDA assets and properties, as well as managing projects currently underway if there are any existing. List of all successor agency obligations to be paid is provided to the county. This is for the period of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 23. Approval must be received from the successor agency, County Oversight Board, and the State Department of Finance. The County Oversight Board is scheduled to meet on January 10th, 2022, which of course is the short time frame that we had to get this passed. And then, of course, the final ROPS items are due to the State Department of Finance on February 1st, 2022. Some of the items that are a part of the obligations are the principal and interest on bonds. Of course, we have our 2005 Series A bond payments, which are calculated at about $470,000. We have our 2014 Series A, B, and C bonds at about $2 million. And there are other expenses associated with this. We have our bond trustee and bond reporting, the maintenance of successor agency owned land, property dissolution consulting, interest payments, loans to the former RDA, as well as moderate income housing fund. A couple of other items, the repayment of city loans, the ROPS calculated repayment amount is about $963,000. We have outstanding principal and accrued interest, which are due as part of the program. And the dissolution laws establishes a formula for the repayment of loans made by cities to the RDA. And of course, 20% of the repayment is deposited into the low or moderate housing fund, and loans accrue simple interest at a rate of 3%. There is a $250,000 annual administrative allowance amount that's established. And the final item is the LAIF interest, as well as AT&T and Angela Chan's lease, calculated at about $53,000. As indicated, the total period is from July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 23. The total ROPS enforceable obligations admin allowance equals to about $3.8 million. As indicated, this amount, this is reported to the County Oversight Board at the January 10th meeting, and then is provided to the State Department of Finance on the February 1st meeting. And one final note is that the funds are then paid to the city by the Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund of the county, which is used to cover these expenses. That does conclude this brief presentation. If there are any questions that anyone might have on this topic.
Board Chair Barcena, what staff is asking for here is for the recommendation to adopt the resolution that approves the ROPS and this administrative budget for this wind down of the successor agency. So it would require a motion.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt the attached resolution approving number 1, the recognized obligation payment schedule 22 to 23, which details the obligations of the SA for the period July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. And number 2, proposed administrative budget for July 1st through 2022 through June 30th, 2023. May I have a second?
I'll go ahead and second.
Okay, second by Council Member Flores. I'll take it to a roll call. Agency members Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores.
Yes.
Is Vice Chair Pulido on the call now? No, okay. And it's yes for myself, so. Oh, hey, welcome. So that is a yes, so that is a 5 yes vote and motion carries. All right, now moving on to public participation on non-agenda items. Do we have any speakers? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. There are no written comments. I'll go ahead and open the lines to see if there's anyone interested in speaking. So the members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on the items listed on the successor agency, I'm sorry, not on the agenda. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the chair and agency member. Each speaker and email reading is limited to 3 minutes, subject to an overall 30-minute time period. Email comments will be read out loud after all speakers have been heard. Anyone is wishing to speak now, if you can please press *9. It looks like there are no speakers.
Okay, if there's no objection by the agency members, I will close public participation. Does any agency member wish to make a comment? If there's no objection by successor agency, I will adjourn the successor agency meeting at 6:14 p.m. and call to order the city council meeting. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, December 13, 2021, 6 p.m. regular meeting of the Bell Gardens City Council. The meeting will now come to order. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 361, please be advised that members of the Bell Gardens City Council may participate in today's meeting telephonically. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting live online through the city's website as noted on the agenda. If any city council member should have a conflict of interest virtually, please leave the room by turning off video and muting yourself. You may still keep listening to the meeting. City Clerk, will you please call roll of the City Council?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Chavez,
Present.
Cortez,
Present.
Flores,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Present.
Mayor Barcena.
Present. Thank you. And now we're gonna listen to a closed session report. City Attorney, can you please provide the closed session reports of the City Council and Successor Agency?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The City Council and the Successor Agency are now back in open session, having met in closed session. Mayor Pro Tem Maria Pulido participated in the discussion of all closed session items remotely. With respect to both the City Council and Successor Agency items appearing on tonight's agendas, briefings were presented, direction was given, but no final action was taken. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're
Mayor?
gonna move.
Sorry,
Yes.
do we need to add to the record that I came into closed session late, but that I was present?
You heard all items, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no.
Thank you. And now we're moving on to our presentations for today. And we do have a certificate of recognition for Angel del Villar from Bell Records. I will go ahead and show it to the camera like this. And it reads as follows. City of Bell Gardens Certificate of Recognition presented to Angel del Villar. On behalf of the City of Bell Gardens and the City Council, we want to thank you for the toy giveaway Bell Records hosted for our city. Your philanthropy undoubtedly brings much joy and happiness to the children of Bell Gardens during the holiday season, and that's what we are grateful for. We wish you much success and prosperity and look forward to many more years of partnerships. And this is coming from me, the Mayor Marco Barcena, as well as the entire council, Maria Pulido, Alejandra Cortez, Jorge Chavez, and Lisette Flores. So at this point, I will open it up for comments from the council. Okay, and I'll get started. I just want to thank Del Records, Angel de Villar, and Brian Gutierrez, the president of Del Giving, for this great event. I believe the count of the toys was 40,000. We worked very hard with our city to make sure that we accommodated the distribution. It was in one of our biggest streets, so it was a little bit of a challenge. But we do believe that this effort, impacted in a very positive way the lives of many kids that can't afford too many toys. So I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for making that effort and bringing it to our community here in Bell Gardens. Thank you so much for that.
I'd just like to add real quick. I know that this is the second year that you guys have this huge giveaway. So I just want to thank Mr. WR for his extreme generosity. I know that our residents here in the city benefited from these beautiful toys and the guest celebrities like Chicharito, who was there, but so did other surrounding communities. And it's an honor and a pride to have you guys here in our community. So thank you so much for your continued generosity and for giving back to our community.
Thank you, Councilmember Flores. Any other comments? All right, thank you. So at this point, we are going to move on to the public hearing, items 1 through 2. And we have item number 1. We are going to, sorry, give me 1 second, please. One. All right, staff will now be proposing the adoption of a resolution establishing a new fee schedule for all recreation and community services facilities and programs for public use. And I will go ahead and open the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor Barcena. This item here, as you stated, is a public hearing to consider adoption of essentially fees for recreation community services. This was an item that came to the council about a year ago among a bunch of other fee changes in community development, PD, basically all the departments within the city. COVID came along and kind of slowed things down. And what we've talked about since that time with the council is the fact that many of our fees are the same for residents and non-residents, or for businesses that are in Bell Gardens or nonprofits, and the same fees for businesses or nonprofits that are outside of Bell Gardens. And so what we're recommending at this time is a fee schedule. It was attached to the staff report here, that it, for the most part, keeps the fees very similar for residents, but generally increases the fees for nonprofits, businesses, or residents of other cities. I can also let you know that within this year's budget, we had a $100,000 scholarship program. So for any residents that aren't able to afford any of the existing fees or any of these new fees, there's a scholarship program that they would qualify for. So essentially what we're trying to do here with the fees is really bifurcate between residents and non-residents. And I'll turn it over to the Recreation Community Services Director to talk a little more in detail about this item. Thank you, Roseanne.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. The report before you requests consideration of approving a new fee schedule for recreation and community services programs facilities for public use. Fees for the Recreation and Community Services Department were last adjusted in 2009. In 2019, the city started work with ClearSource Financial to do an analysis. Then COVID hit and the report was put to the side. We proposed a rate recommendation to remain below direct costs recovery. In fiscal year 21-22, the City Council approved a robust youth activity scholarship fund in the amount of $100,000 to assist families experiencing difficulty paying for their children's participation in youth programming. No child will be prohibited from participating due to a lack of financial resources. Staff also conducted an informal survey of youth sports programs offered by some of the surrounding cities, Montebello, Southgate, Linwood, just to name a few. And in all instances, the fees charged here in Bell Gardens remain lower than all surveyed cities. The new proposed rate structure for facilities will go a little farther. It will create a 4-category system as opposed to just 2 Bell Gardens and non-resident. What we're proposing is that it'll be Bell Gardens resident, including nonprofits, non-resident, nonprofits, which would be anybody outside of Bell Gardens, Bell Gardens businesses and commercial, and non-Bell Gardens business and commercial. The new rate structure also includes a number of amenities and rental equipment that were not included in the fee structure, such as the rental of canopies, tables, chairs, bases, audiovisual. And we've also had a couple of requests for parents to host a skate party in our skate rink, in our skateboard park for like 2 hours. And so we don't have anything set up for that. So we're proposing to make those amenities available to the residents. And with this fee structure, it allows us to do that. Also not included in this rate structure are any fees associated with the new aquatic facility, which will need to be established once the facility is complete. And that will include lessons as well as recreational swim and rentals of the aquatic facility. And so what we're hoping to accomplish here is, as the city manager mentioned, is just to have a better rate structure where we can charge fees accordingly, but still keep in mind that our residents come first and that they get priority over the rental and use of any of our facilities. And just to give you an example, we often get a number of like professional, say, soccer organizations, and we have a fee of less than $40, whereas now the rate structure for an outside use by a commercial group would take the rental rate to $70 an hour, which is comparable to what a lot of other cities are charging. So we're looking at just trying to recoup costs where we can and not have an impact on our residents and on our children. So I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. I do believe that we have a council member comment section later after the public participation. So maybe we'll save the questions for that time. But now I'm gonna go ahead and open public comments for this item. City Clerk, can you please announce the instructions for public participation?
Yes, Mayor. The members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on the public hearing item number 1. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the mayor and council members. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Anyone wishing to make comments may do so at this time by pressing *9. When instructed, press *6 to unmute yourself. Individuals joining us through the Zoom app may request to make a comment by using the raise hand feature on Zoom. It looks like there are no speakers for this item.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. So at this point, given that there are no public comments, I will go ahead and turn it over to the council. Does any member of the council wish to make any comments, or do you have any questions in regards to the presentation? Okay, I will go ahead and just give some comments on it. We've been trying to get this fee schedule. Okay. Okay, we will now move to close the public hearing. If there are no further city council comments, I will go ahead and close it at 6:27 p.m. All right, and now we're gonna do council comments again, and you guys can also make a motion to approve the item.
I did have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for that. And maybe this is just a clarification point for staff, but I was looking at the master fee schedule on one of the attachments, and I noticed that, for example, I think it's for, so there's outdoor basketball, which is number 6, and then right before it, there's baseball and softball field. And I don't believe that it has a rental fee or refundable deposit. Are they the same as if it was a basketball court or any other, like or a tennis or pickleball court? Or does the baseball/softball field have its own separate one? Or is it just because maybe right now we don't currently have a baseball or a softball field currently like fully operational? Just a clarification.
Councilmember Chavez, item number 5 on that same sheet, it states baseball field, softball field, and it has a rate structure. It's on the first page, I believe, page number 22 at the bottom, and it's number 5, and it says baseball/softball field. And right now that would be for the fields that are currently being constructed or will be reconstructed at the Cistern project.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Question, Roseanne, at the moment, if a family is unable to afford an activity, is there a way that we can help them out?
Councilmember Flores, absolutely. And this goes not just for our youth sports programs, but that can be for a dance program or any of our other activities, youth sports and recreational classes. So yes, definitely. No child would be prohibited from participating due to lack of financial resources.
Thank you, that's all.
Okay, I do have a comment here, or more of a question. I noticed, for example, in item number 5, where you pointed out, Director, that we have baseball/softball field, and it's going from 20, I believe it's going from, well, it says current fees, it says 20, and then it says 30, right? And then it gives me the $30 for resident or nonprofit. And then it gives me $40 for, is that non-resident? Yes, for non-resident. What was the fee, the old fee for non-residents on there? The old non-resident fee?
So they didn't have a non-resident rate.
Got
It was,
okay.
if they used the facility during the weekday, they were charged $20, and it didn't matter if you were resident or non-resident. And then if you used the field on the weekend, it would be $30 an hour. And so the rate structure that we're proposing is that the resident would be a $30, and then it would go non-resident 40, 45, and 55.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. All right, does anyone want to make a motion to approve?
I'll go ahead and move to approve Cortez.
I'll second.
Okay, it's a motion by Councilmember Alejandra Cortez and a second by Flores, and we'll take it to a roll call. Councilmember Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
and yes for myself, so motion carries. And at this point, we are going to another public hearing. This is item number 2. Correct. And at this time, we'll open the public hearing for item number 2 at 6:32 p.m. City Manager, will you please introduce the item?
Thank you again, Mayor Barsina. This item is to conduct a public hearing and adopt a resolution to vacate a portion of a publicly owned segment of property at Shoal Street and Haboneria Road. In a little more plain English for the council, this is a right-of-way that the city owns that is not currently used for a right-of-way at this time. By vacating that right-of-way, it turns that parcel into a piece of land that you could actually use to potentially construct something such as a billboard. That's been talked about and considered in the past. It's not being brought to council at this time, but the first step in being able to do that would be to vacate that land and then therefore be and file all of the certifications with the recorder's office and pass a resolution so that we could potentially construct something on that with additional council authority in the future. I will turn it over to Doug Banosh, our city engineer. He's going to share a PowerPoint with us to give you a little more detail.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Is my screen shared?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. Tonight, we're here to consider vacating a portion of Haboneria and Shell Street. A little background. The City of Bell Gardens is considering entering into a billboard agreement for construction of a new billboard sign in at this area. Prior to this construction, the area must be vacated because it is public right of way. Pursuant to Government Code Section 65402, the Planning Commission made a finding that it's consistent with the general plan circulation element, which has to be done prior to vacating of the public street. On December 6th, the Planning Commission did consider this and determined it was consistent with the general plan. The site itself is bound on the north by Azimuth Park, to the south the vacant Burke Oil Lot, to the east Shoal Street, and to the west the I-710 freeway. And it's an area about 2,800 square feet. This is looking from the street at what the current area looks like. It's block walled and fenced off. As part of a vacation, we are required to prepare a legal description of the area to be vacated. This is here the legal description. And here is the plat or the plan showing the actual vacated area. Currently, right now, this is all unimproved area of public right of way. This shows the area of impact and the general location of the billboard in red, along with existing street improvements, which will not change. And in greater detail, we provided a little better detail of how that, if a billboard does fit into the right of way or into that vacated parcel of right of way, that's how it would fit and be within the confines of the right of way or the vacated parcel. I'm sorry. Right now, we know that that portion of Shoal and Haboneria is no longer required as public street purposes for the city. If we move with the summary street vacation, it will not affect any public access or to any lands that abut this segment, which includes the state of California and the city of Bell Gardens. And that this vacation is consistent with the general plan. And his staff recommendations to open the public hearing and take any comments. And upon completion of public hearing, adopt resolution 2021-103, ordering the summary vacation of a portion of Haboneria and Shoal Street. And direct the city clerk to send a certified copy to the Los Angeles County Recorder and direct staff to send a resolution to all affected utility companies. And I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions from the council? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and go to public participation. I do believe we already opened the public hearing. Is that correct? So we're just going to move on to public participation. And City Clerk, will you please announce the instructions for public participation?
Yes, Mayor. The members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on the public hearing item number 2. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the mayor and council members. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Anyone wishing to make a comment may do so at this time by pressing *9. When instructed, press *6 to unmute yourself. Individuals joining us through the Zoom app may request to make a comment by using the raise hand feature on Zoom. It looks like there are no speakers, Mayor.
Okay, if there is no objection by the city council, I will close public participation. And I will go to council member comments. Does any member of the council wish to make a comment? Okay, if there are no council member comments, I will now close the public participation. Public hearing actually at 6:39 p.m. And I will ask for a motion to approve this item. I will go ahead and motion staff's recommendation to conduct a public hearing and receive public testimony on the proposed summary street, which we already did. Number 2, adopt the attached resolution ordering the summary street vacation of a portion of Jaboneria Road and Shoal Street, which is an unused and closed public street on land owned by the city. Number 3, direct the city clerk to send a certified confirming copy of the attached resolution to the Los Angeles County Recorder. And number 4, direct staff to send a dated copy of attached resolution to the affected utility companies. May I have a second?
I'll second.
That was Maria? Okay, that's second by Vice Mayor Maria Pulido. So we'll take it to a roll call. Councilmember Chavez,
Yes.
Councilmember Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
and yes for myself, so motion carries unanimously. And now we are going to be going to public participation on agenda items only. City Clerk, public participation is now open. Can you please announce the instructions for public participation?
Yes, Mayor. The members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on items listed on the agenda. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the city council. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Anyone wishing to make a comment may do so at this time by pressing *9. When instructed, press *6 to unmute yourself. Individuals joining us through the Zoom app may request to make comments by using the raise hand feature on Zoom. It looks like there are no speakers.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. If there's no objection by the City Council, I will close public participation. City Manager, will you please give your report?
Thanks again, Mayor Barcena. I'd just like to note this is the last scheduled meeting of the City Council. And I think it's been a busy year, another COVID year. And I just want to mention a few things. I think that the city as an organization is finishing strong with showing a lot of concern and consideration for residents during the holiday time. Just a reminder of a few things and a mention of a couple things coming up. Thanksgiving, we provided 1,600 meals, including 1,200 turkeys with Assemblymember Christina Garcia's office. A couple of days later, we provided 300 meals to Bell Gardens residents as well. As you mentioned, Mayor Barcena, we supported Dell Records and Dell Giving in providing thousands of toys to Bell Gardens residents and to residents regionally, probably LA County and maybe even into some other counties. A week after that, which was last weekend, we provided meals to 750 families. And this coming weekend, it's a pre-registered event, but we intend on providing food, toys, programming for 1,500 Bell Gardens residents. And I think just as a final exclamation point, we received notice that we've received $4 million grant, Prop 68 grant for improvements at Veterans Park. We know all the work that's going on over at Ford Park with the cistern project and the improvements that'll come after that project's done, with the aquatic center moving forward. The work that staff has been doing, that the council's been doing at some of the smaller parks, including Marlowe Parks. And it's really a nice cherry on top to receive another $4 million that will go to Veterans Park to really improve that park. So thank you, Mayor Barcena.
Thank you, City Manager, for the report. And now we are going to move on to our consent calendar, items 3 to 14. Does any member of the City Council wish to pull any item for a separate discussion?
Yes.
Okay, I
I'd
believe,
like to pull item number 11, 14, and 12.
okay. May I have a motion to approve the rest of the items?
I'll go ahead and motion to approve those items.
Okay, I'll go ahead and second that. So the motion is to approve items 3 to 14 with the exception of 11, 14, and 12. And I'm taking it to a roll call. Councilmember Chavez?
Yes.
Thank you, Cortez.
Yes.
Thank you, Flores.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Pulido.
Yes.
And it's a yes for myself, so motion carries to approve all items except for 11, 14, and 12. And now we're gonna move on to item number 11. Councilmember Flores, it's all yours.
Yes, I just pulled this item. Actually, all of the items that I pulled are surrounding our budget. So I'd like to get some details. City Manager, if you can please walk us through this.
Yes, Councilmember Flores. So this item on number 11, this was a grant from the Office of Traffic and Safety to the Police Department. The council authorized approval to adopt this grant. And part of the grant agreement is to purchase a speed trailer. So this is a trailer that the police department places in strategic locations to warn people of their speed so that they may be more cautious, et cetera. I believe the purchase for the grant was $85,000, of which we'll use approximately $20,000 for the purchase of this speed trailer. I'll turn it over to the police chief to give a little more detail. My understanding is we had a speed trailer in the past, and this would replace it with a new speed trailer. And again, this is through a grant from the state. Please provide some more detail, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Really, you covered the majority of it. It's a trailer that is towed and put in specific locations based on complaints or traffic accidents to get vehicles to slow down. It also has the ability to put messages on it, whether it's, flashing red light ahead, school children, whatever it is, we can put on there as well. It's replacing an old speed trailer that we no longer use because it's inoperable and it's not cost effective to fix.
Thank you. I'll go ahead. Can we move through the items and then run a one single motion versus?
Sure, yeah. Yes, Mayor. Yes, Councilmember Flores. The second item is improvement of a replacement public works truck. So this is one of the large, we'll call it a trash, looks like a dump truck, probably to just the normal eye. This is the vehicle that you'd see coming around if somebody calls and says, hey, somebody dumped a bunch of mattresses or refrigerators, heavy duty items, or when we've done community cleanups. The trucks that we have two of these trucks. They're approximately 20 to 22 years old. The one that we need to replace has a motor that's completely inoperable. To put in a remanufactured motor would cost approximately $12,000 when we carry a 1-year warranty. But the vehicle itself is well beyond the end of its normal useful life. They're an expensive vehicle. They're $82,000. We would expect to get another 20 years out of this vehicle. Our Public Works Director and the department have done a good job in their budgeting for other vehicles, and they've been able to come up with savings within the budget from vehicles that they purchased that were below budget. And so they've come up with about $50,000 worth of savings within the budget, and we need an additional $23,000 for this vehicle. This would be a vehicle that if we don't replace it, it would be noticeable from the council and from the residents, just because of the heavy duty nature of the items that are that are serviced and picked up with this vehicle. And if I move to item number 14 as well, I think from that that sort of budgetary basis that you've asked the question about. So this is for national opioid settlement. This arrangement has been brought to us by our legal counsel to make us aware of a settlement that we may join that would benefit the state, the county, and the city as well too, and potentially could result in additional revenues to the city over a almost 2-decade period of time. And so all three of these items from a staff perspective are recommended because they're fiscally prudent and they're either for items that are grant funded or we found budget for that are definitely needed. In the case of the opioid settlement would provide revenues that could be used for mental health services and things of that nature. Thank you, Councilmember Flores.
Thank you. And before I motion to approve these items, I bring this out because I really believe that the financial transparency of the city is really important, and the sustainability of our city is founded the financial stability, and it's more to show off to that our city continues to be very budget friendly, and we find creative ways, in this case, a grant or savings in different departments to be able to make sure that our city is being, properly ran with quality services and resources, even if it means a new car, to be able to provide these resources to our community. So that's the purpose of me doing this. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and motion to approve item 11, 12, and 14.
I did have a question, if I may.
Please go ahead, Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you so much. And this is just on item 11 again to the chief, because I'm curious. In regards to the speed trailer, what's usually like the life expectancy of one of those?
10, 15 years, depending on how well we maintain it, but at least 10 to 12 years for sure.
Okay. I noticed that in the report, it mentioned that we did receive an $85,000 grant, and the speed trailer is only going to cost $19,000. What will we do with the remainder of the grant?
All of that's listed in the grant approval that was brought to council a few months ago. It's enforcement, education, pays for some overtime on some details, but a lot of it's education as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and second Councilmember Flores' motion to approve items 11, 12, and 14. And I'll take it to a roll call. Councilmember Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
and yes for myself, so motion carries. And now the entire consent calendar is approved. And we are now moving on to discussion items 15 through 18. Number 15 is City Manager, will you please announce discussion item number 15?
Thank you, Mayor Barson. This local commission's appointment list is not necessarily here for any particular appointment, but it's also to remind the council, if you look at the staff report, there are some vacancies there that are available, and then also provide for any residents that may be watching the meeting or may not otherwise be aware of vacancies to consider applying. But at this time, it is open for any council member to make any appointments to the posted vacancies.
Thank you, and I do want to thank my fellow council members for forming a quorum in the senior commission. I think they've already met a few times, so I'm glad that we're finally able to start working on that. But seeing that there are no requests to add anyone to any of the commission's appointments list, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to item number 16. City Manager, will you please announce item number 16?
Thanks again, Mayor Barcena. It's been a couple of weeks since we had our last council member meeting, but at that time, we provided the council with some broad information regarding the pension liabilities that the city has and potential for strategies to, using financial mechanisms to leverage some savings out of those pension liabilities. One of the things that, and It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things you've seen all the other cities in the region consider, and in many cases actually execute, is a pension obligation bond. What that essentially is if you have a liability or you owe money to Calpers at, let's say, 7%, you can issue bonds, let's say at 3.5%. You will save the 3.5% interest, which for a city of this size would be several $100,000 a year to the general fund. So it's a technical financial transaction, but it results in real savings that would be meaningful to cities such as Bell Gardens. So I will turn it over to Manuel Carrillo, our Director of Administrative Services, to provide a more detailed presentation that we promised to bring at this council meeting here. So take it away, Manuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. And actually, with us this evening is Mr. Michael Bush from Urban Futures. If you recall, he was with us our last council meeting, and he's going to provide us a bit more in-depth look at the pension pension obligation bonds and some of the options that are available to the city moving forward. So, Michael, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Let's move to the next slide, please. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. As your City Manager included in his opening remarks, we presented a broad view of the city's pension liability a few weeks ago. At the staff's request, we were asked to dive in a little deeper into looking at options for the city to address its unfunded liability related to its Calpers pension. So tonight, I'm going to be presenting a deeper dive into our analysis. It's going to include these 5 sections of discussion tonight. We're going to start with your pension liability and work our way all the way through some council discussion points. And I think you're going to hear some positive news tonight, which is a good thing when it comes to pensions. We've been able to update our analysis to include even the most recent decisions made by the Calpers board, which are favorable to the city of Bell Gardens, and in line with Councilmember Flores' comments earlier regarding sustainability and transparency. Next slide, please. One more, Manuel. Thank you. So most agencies in the state of California, as you're all aware, are under the Calpers pension system. It's somewhere around 99% of cities, municipalities, and special districts that use the Calpers pension system. So the city of Bell Gardens is one of basically thousands that are within the plan. And the pension system is broken down into 2 very simple components. One they refer to as your normal cost. And basically what that means is that's the amount you need to pay Calpers into the pension plan to keep current with your obligations to meet your employee agreements and to continue to fund the pension plan going forward. Like most agencies, as your city manager alluded to, you carry an unfunded liability. That unfunded liability is not because you haven't made your payments historically. You've made all of your payments historically. Unfortunately, from time to time, Calpers will modify its policy or policies, I should say, that create additional liabilities. And also they will have returns on the investments of your money that are held by Calpers in your plan below their actuarial assumptions. And as we're going to discuss and focus tonight, we're going to focus on the UAL, the unfunded actual liability that have resulted from changes in the discount rate by Calpers, investment loss and gains from recessionary periods that everyone has faced, as well as other actuarial changes and legislative changes to policies and plans. In total, you're currently paying about $3.6 million for your UAL. That's on an annual basis, but it goes up. And we're going to focus on the escalation of that amount and how we think you may be able to deal with that efficiently. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit of a breakdown of how your pension liability is a percentage of your payroll. And we color-coded it to kind of help understand that not all of the money you send to Calpers that's approved through the budget that you all see annually is to pay a UAL payment. In fact, there's a component of it that goes for normal cost. There is an EPMC component in your contract that you've agreed to with your employee groups. That's an employer paid member contribution. So it's a little bit of a planned benefit. Then on top of that is your UAL payment. So the normal cost, the EPMC and the UAL make up the total amount that you send to CalPERS. And you have two plans. The miscellaneous employees, basically everyone non-sworn, is in one plan. And all your sworn officers, which typically for most cities is police and fire, they have a separate plan. And it's not a coincidence. In fact, it's pretty standard that we see that the liabilities across the board are typically higher in the safety plans for a variety of reasons. I think the most leading reason is the benefit plan structure for the safety employees is a little bit more enhanced than your miscellaneous employees. Next slide, please, Manuel. Here's a little bit of a breakdown of what you actually have with CalPERS. And I think it's important to note how much money CalPERS is actually holding of yours. In fact, it's a little more than $109 million. So since your plan was developed many years ago, many of these CalPERS plans were created in the 40s and 50s. You've been making payments to CalPERS to fulfill your pension obligation to your employees, both current and retirees. Over that period of time, you've sent them, millions of dollars. They put those assets to work basically in a pooled investment plan. And since then, they've created this market value combined, again, of about $100 million. Within that, as you can see here, you're not quite 100% funded. And what that means is to meet all your liabilities, you come up a little bit short within your plans, roughly 30% within your plans. You're funded at about a 71% level, which is about average. Most of the pension work that we've done, as the city manager alluded to with your neighboring agencies, they've all been funded somewhere in the high 60s to low 70s. And this seems to be a target area for most of the individual agencies that we work with. I do want to point out something else here, again, to Councilmember Flores's comments about sustainability. Years ago, the city took action to manage and mitigate increasing liabilities with its pension plan, as you can see here, with the Tier 2 plan. This was something the city initiated, negotiated with its labor groups, and amended its contract with CalPERS to create. Sometime later than that period, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, the state actually took action, which is the PEPPER plan that you see here, once again, to mitigate increasing pension liabilities. So the city has started with a plan that was negotiated with employee groups, took a step to lower the go-forward liability and for new employees and created a second tier. And then through state legislation, basically a third tier, which we referred to as PEPPER, was created again to manage liability, to assist cities with sustainability, actually, and to ensure that service levels can be retained and pension costs can be somewhat mitigated going forward. Next slide, please, Manuel. You also have another liability, and I decided to include this here. We're not going to get into a lot of detail about this one, but I want to point out the liability here is something else that you pay for towards your retiree groups. And OPEB stands for other post-employment benefits. Retirement benefits, basically, it's retiree health for the most part. And like a lot of cities, you have a fairly substantial OPEB liability. If you'll see here, it's greater than your CalPERS liability, and something to watch as you go forward. Now, this is in here because I think, as the city manager alluded to, there are savings that we can present that may go to your general fund should you decide to move forward. Most of the agencies that we work with, they choose to allocate a portion of the savings as they go forward to address their OPEB liability, again, so they can ensure that current level of services are met going forward, and a funding mechanism is put in place to basically try to catch up on the OPEB liability. Next slide, please. So your OPEB liability and your pension liability are basically a series of annual adjustments. So specifically to your pension liability, each year, CalPERS will assess whether or not there's a gain or loss based on outcome of their investment portfolio. And they'll also make other adjustments. As you can see here, you'll see non-investment gains or losses. You might see some other assumption changes on here. The non-investment gains or losses and assumption change, those are CalPERS adjustments. So as you can see, it's not entirely based on return from the market. In fact, I would say most of your liability has more likely than not been created by adjustments that they've made in recent years to policy. So for example, when they decided to go, at one point Calpers was at 8.25% of a discount rate return, as your city manager alluded to, they're now down to 7. When they reduce, each time they reduce the discount rate, it increases your liability. That was a fairly significant adjustment they made, and they implemented over a few years. And now you're somewhat trying to catch up to that adjustment. In addition to that, Calpers will make other adjustments, such as mortality, how long people will live. A few years ago, they adjusted that. A few years for both men and women of retirees. It increased pension liabilities across the state by 4%. Again, nothing the city has done, just changes that they make on an actuarial basis. But this is somewhat of the focus. And the way I think you might want to look at this is like a series of loans. Each one of these are referred to as amortization base. And this is how Calpers basically defines what your obligation is, but it's also specifically how they want you to address the problem. And what I mean by that is if you're going to pay Calpers any more money than your annual payment, you've got to tell them specifically which one of these bases you want to pay. And as you can see, we have them numbered from 1 to 23. You'll see the year next to that. That's the year the base was put in place. The reason is this is, again, all from your annual Calpers reports on why they made the adjustment. And the term is how long they amortized it. So as you'll see, from 1 all the way down to 23, they vary. Some are as long as 27 years, some are much shorter, like 9 years. What you'll see towards the tail end of this in 19 and 20, for example, Calpers made a decision in those years to amortize basically everything over a fixed 20-year period. And no longer did they go to 30 years. It's now 20 years to amortize everything out. So going forward, everything will be layered on top of your current liability with a 20-year amortization base as they make those adjustments. What we've also provided here as a deeper dive is kind of a look at what's happened over the last 3 years. And what you'll see, you've been making UAL payments to pay down your liability. However, the adjustments as it relates to Calpers board action and or investment returns have somewhat kept you flat. So you've not made a whole lot of progress in paying down the liability. But I've got good news in a few slides that I think will improve on that bottom line. Next slide, please, Manuel. So we kind of look at your liability. We make this slide to kind of show how everything kind of lays on top of each other with different amortization bases, meaning longer terms for some and shorter than others. Some are larger dollar amounts. And so what you see reflected here, if you look at the numbers and the colors and you go to the prior slide, you'll see that they associate. So where you have, like, for example, base 3 and 9, those are larger liabilities. You can see the thickness of the color. You can see how far they go out. That's an indication of how far their amortizations go. And as you get down to like 22, for example, you can see it's a 20-year thin layer that just basically goes on top. That red dotted line, however, is a credit. So Calpers amortizes your credits as well. So for example, if you have a very large return on investment, they don't amortize it or just adjust everything at once. They amortize your credit over time, just like they do your deficits. So they kind of average themselves out, but we're able to model that. And I think that's important to note how that comes into play as you go forward. And I'll explain how this is going to play out in the next few slides. Next slide, please, Manu. So here is your liability as we see it growing. And as you'll see, this is pretty typical of most cities we work with. Some are a lot more substantially basically growing. The interest, the costs are growing up a lot faster. You're doing pretty good in comparison to some of the other ones. We've got some clients, honestly, where their growth is tripling over this period of time. You are just a little short of doubling, but it does all add up, and it does cause some concern for budgets and service sustainability, as we'll go through in the next few slides. But as you can see here, you're at about 3.6 million projected in 22-23, and it goes up to about 5 million, kind of plateaus for a little bit and starts to come down. And you're not back to your current level of budget funding until 2037. So more than a decade away from now, will you get back to a point where you are today based on what Calpers has provided. And you have a liability of about 45 million. But as your city manager pointed out in his opening remarks, that 7% interest rate you end up paying $80 million to pay down 45 million of liability. Next slide, please. What I think is most important is that growth period of where you start in 22, 23, and where you go to the peak that we saw in the previous slide of about 5 million to 5.1 million. There is an upside to get to that point, and there's a downside, obviously, to where you come back down to where you equal where you start. It's about $13.6 million. So in order to fund your pension cost, you'd have to find an additional $13.6 million within your budget between fiscal year 22, 23 to 35, 36. So what happens typically is we see a lot of services or investments in infrastructure or technology get what we refer to as crowded out. And so resources get allocated from one part of your budget to meet this obligation. Again, this is the focus, I think, of why several municipalities, even around the city of Bell Gardens, have looked at this issue and taken some action. Next slide, please, Manuel. So let's talk a little bit about the go forward. Next slide, please. Here's the good news. This last year, as you can see in that red circle, Calpers had a ginormous investment return. Their actual expectation was 7%. They returned more than 21%. So that created a very large credit for all of the cities and all the participants in the plan. Calpers had a risk mitigation policy their board adopted that suggested anytime they have such a large return above their actuarial expectation, they would lower the discount, basically lower the interest rate assumption from 7% to something much lower. In their risk mitigation policy specifically, they were going to lower it to 6.8%, which they did. They took some action to do that. Their finance committee made that recommendation. Finance committee basically is their entire board, so we don't assume the board will take a different action. With that, however, and given the inflationary issues that you're probably all hearing about in the news and articles that you're reading, they also adjusted the price inflator for inflation, increasing it slightly. But you know, between the lowering the discount and the inflator, it only increased things about $3 million. So you actually get a credit of $10 million to your plan. So your liability is going to go down to $35.4 million. That's our estimate going forward. So you haven't issued any bonds, you haven't refinanced any of the debt, but you've had a lowering of your liability. And this is important to note. This is a look forward. So this information won't be into your plan because CalPERS works 2 years in arrears until a future report, as you can see the 22-23 report. So we want to make sure as you talk about addressing your unfunded liability, that this forward view, forward analysis of where you're going to stand is understood so that you don't address your liability greater than you need to. So you don't want to fund a $45 million liability now if you think your liability is down to $35 million. Next slide, please, Manu. So this is kind of how we modeled it. This is based on some information we received from CalPERS. And one thing I think is unique about our approach in working with our clients, I'm almost certain we're the only firm that does this. We actually invite CalPERS into our discussions. So as we do modeling based on CalPERS board action, we actually have CalPERS staff peer review our work to make sure it's accurate. CalPERS is not providing this level of analysis yet to its member agencies, but they are kind enough to review what we present ahead of time. And they've looked at our methodology for calculating this assessment and have agreed that we're accurate. The one thing I do want to note, this is probably more of an issue that Manuel have to watch, is when they lowered the discount and they adjusted the inflation factor, they did increase normal cost, as you can see in the bottom of this chart here. So expect your normal cost to go up, but your UAL liability to decline. Next slide, please. So here's what things look like currently. So the current liability you see there is in gray. That's the colored chart that I showed you a few slides ago. That dotted line now represents the change based on adjustments made from CalPERS. So you're already having a declining liability. It will somewhat look a little bit better to you, but as the city manager pointed out, there's a tremendous opportunity to refinance this liability at low rates. In fact, rates have actually come back down in recent weeks. So the opportunity to present this to you tonight comes at a good time for the market as well. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about those strategies. So prior to really getting to pension obligation bonds, we want to look at everything else first, so that we can ensure, is there other opportunities to finance liability without issuing, funding bonds? Is there administrative items or other restructuring that we can do within the organization to meet the objective? So the next slides will cover some of that discussion. So we look at a couple different things. First of all, we want to make sure that cities are budgeting the liability across all the funds that it should. And for most cities, that really means putting some of the liability in the operating departments, most specifically those enterprises. So water, sewer, power, airports, cities that have all of those things typically have some liability there. You have a small amount there, which is probably appropriate for the size of the city that you have. We also look at reserves and one-time monies. Prior to COVID hitting, this was an area that a lot of cities would look at their reserve balances. And again, looking at how they were investing those monies versus the discount rate that your city manager brought up earlier to determine, how much excess surplus cash do cities have and whether or not any of those monies can be used to pay down the liability through additional discretionary payments. Given the COVID impact, we've seen those opportunities dry up in a lot of places. Where most agencies no longer feel comfortable allocating resources to that and are funding their liability through different approaches. Across the state, many agencies have set up pension stabilization funds. They're referred to as a 115 trust. There are hundreds of them, if not thousands, probably across the state. A big partner in that space is a group called PARS. And years ago, when I reached out to them to talk about the 115 trust, they'd mentioned that they were controlling hundreds back then, but the average deposit was about $50,000. So it wasn't significant to meet the obligation. Basically, a 115 trust is money that's set aside to pay your Calpers liability. Once you put it into the trust, you can't take it out and spend it on something else. So a lot of cities, make the decision to hold the money within their own reserves to retain discretion as to how and when they want to use those monies. We did look at some refunding opportunities. Some agencies that we work with have outstanding bonds, and we can refinance those bonds for interest rate savings, similar to the discussion we're having here. And those savings get allocated toward paying down the liability, as opposed to just going back into the general fund or into an enterprise fund. We did not find those opportunities in Bell Gardens City. What debt the city does have is relatively small, and I think actually it's maturing pretty soon. So it didn't make any sense to look at those any deeper. A tax exempt exchange is another category that we look at. Basically, what this does is this takes a look at how cities appropriate capital funding and whether or not they are funding capital projects with cash on hand. And if so, whether that cash on hand can be secured to pay down the pension liability in exchange for tax exempt financing for capital projects. Again, going back to your city manager's opening comment on the interest rate for Calpers, it's at 7%. The bonds that you could issue for your capital projects would be issued at probably 2.5%. And so for some agencies, it makes sense for them to allocate cash on hand to pay Calpers and to finance at a 2% rate for capital projects. Then again, leveraging dollars. Most of the options that you see on here present an opportunity to pay down your liability without service impacts, without a budget impact. That's why they're so valuable and something that we look at. When we do find these opportunities available, to be candid with the council, it's a small percentage of the total liability that usually impacts, but certainly every dollar counts. In some cases, it's maybe 5 or 10% of the liability that you can really look at these sources for. But we like to exhaust every opportunity before we talk about the issuance of pension obligation bonds. And this review here, we've done that. So that leaves us to pension obligation bonds. And I think the next few slides will kind of show you why they've been so popular. Similar to our findings here with other strategies, they're somewhat limiting, but these strategies certainly are important on a go-forward basis. They're not one-time opportunities. There are opportunities that we would recommend you consider in a pension policy, which we'll talk about in a second, so you can always manage your liability going forward. Next slide, please, Manuel. One more. So we looked at two different options to fund your liability, and this is based on your current liability, not the credit liability. We'd have to make one more adjustment based on some determinations by staff and Calpers to really get into the detail of what a structure would look like based on your new credit. But we ran them based on your $45 million liability. And I think what you'll see here is we ran two options. One's a 15-year, the other's a 20-year. I want to point out how this chart basically gets put together. And again, the emphasis that the city manager made on budgetary savings. So the red line represents your liability currently. So that's what you would normally have. The orange line is your liability with the credit. So it gives you some example of how well things have improved from where you started from. As you'll note, if you issue pension obligation bonds, you will have basically budgetary savings, and that's that light green area. Those are real dollars. Those are real benefits to your budget. Those are real funds that you can allocate out towards projects, funding other liabilities, or other priorities that the council has. The solid blue lines represent the debt service you would have on your liability. So this represents basically a short-term transaction. It has savings of about 30%. We used a true interest cost of about 3%, 3.17. We used a recent transaction we completed with San Fernando, which was A-rated, and we added some basis points for cushion since the market seems to move up and down. But I think the real goal here is the $600,000 annual budget savings. Next slide, please. So then we looked at what a 20-year would look like again. And I think what you see here is just as you extend out the term a little bit, we refer to this more as a hybrid where it follows your current obligation for your pension bond liability. And what that does is it actually increases budgetary savings. This is by far the most popular structure that's been implemented, not just by us, but across the state. But most agencies refer to this as their choice for, I think, a couple reasons. First, it doesn't increase the interest rate of borrowing very much at all. It does increase budgetary savings, and that is important because as new liabilities present themselves, you'll want some budget savings to mitigate that. But also you may want to use some budget savings for other priorities that the council and community may have, or as I suggested a little bit earlier, to take a portion or significant portion to pay down your OPEB liability. But these are the options that are presented. Significant savings in total payments, as we refer to, you're starting at 80 million. These are now 60 million. So substantial savings into what your capital outlay or financial outlay would be to CalPERS. Next slide, please, Manuel. Now, POBs do not come without risk. And so one of the most common discussed areas of pension bonds is the Government Finance Officers Association Advisory Against Pension Obligation Bonds. The GFOA has continued with its advisory. They are not supportive of the issuance of pension obligation bonds, and listed here to the left are their reasons why. One thing to note is the GFOA advisory is, I'm going to guess, 2 decades old now. It's not current. They've not updated it. We have reached out to them about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago and asked if they would consider it based on the changes that CalPERS has made and the way the market has responded to pension obligation bonds. And they declined to do that. They were happy to accept our comments, but suggested they would not change the policy. And I think what's important to note about GFOA before I go through their specific issues is that they represent all government agencies across the United States, all plans, both large and small. So it's not a California specific advisory or Nevada or New York or anywhere else. It's just a general advisory. And as you can see with their specific items, they don't want to see complex instruments, swaps, cabs, derivatives, or guaranteed investment contracts, GICs. So pension bonds in California have not been issued with any of those structures in the last several years. They're all basically fixed rate bonds as demonstrated in the prior slide, 20 years, 15 years, level debt service, no capital appreciation bonds, pretty straightforward financing, similar to what you would see with other bonds that the city has issued for its redevelopment agency, now successor agency, or its water department. The other is to increase the debt burden, reduce flexibility. So what they're saying is, and it's somewhat accurate with this conversation, is what they want to see is agencies take a position where they don't try to solve the whole problem by financing their liability. They want the plan itself to have some flexibility to work out options, basically to increase market value of assets. So how does that happen? By increased investment returns. So you've seen that this last year. There's a substantial increase in market value of your assets. On the other hand, you've also seen, let me turn on my light, sorry. You've also seen that you're in a great recessionary period, you can lose 20% in a year or two. So it goes somewhat up and down, but we think pension plans should be funded somewhere in the 90% criteria to 100, depending on comfort level that the agencies have. And so that's one area where we look at your GASB 68 liability. This is a debt. The position I think the GFOA takes is that your pension liability is not considered a debt, but as Manuel will tell you, it is in your financial statements as a debt obligation under GASB 68. There used to be bonds sold in the early 2000s that were make-whole call pension bonds. We've not issued a bond structured like that. Basically, what that means is once you issue the bonds, there's no ability to refinance those for interest rate savings. Instead, we issue with our clients, every bond has a 10-year call, meaning after 10 years, you can look at the transaction and see if you can refinance it for interest rate savings anytime after that 10th year. Pretty standard practice for bonds across the state and very similar to bonds you've issued in the past. As you can see in our presentation, we're not assuming an extension of the repayment or financing normal costs. We are focused only on the UAL. And we are looking at a limited period, meaning 15 or 20 years. We're not looking at 30 years, 40 years. It's a pretty straightforward period. So again, pension bonds have not been issued with number 3 or number 4 by us or any of our clients. And then standalone POBs are not viewed as credit positive. There's truth to that. The rating agencies look at your pension liability, whether you issue bonds or you decide to take another approach. It's reviewed as a credit neutral. However, in the scheme of things, they do look at your liability as a total amount, and that is based on your base credit rating. So the faster you're able to pay it down, that's when the credit really takes effect, when it's no longer neutral. But from the day that you have a liability of 45 million and you issue bonds of, let's say, 45 million, it's not considered a credit positive to do that. But you'll definitely pay down your liability faster. It'll be cheaper, and you'll be able to put money to work to pay down liabilities a little quicker. So we do think that there's a way to make that a number 5 issue actually a credit positive, maybe in the short to long term. Now, really the last item, you see it, and the reason why it's in red here, this is the number 1 issue that comes up everywhere we go, and it's the issue we want to basically discuss openly and transparently again. So the issue with the pension bonds, the reason why I think the GFOA really creates their advisory is basically what happens with the money once you issue the debt. So there are 2 structures to pension bonds, potentials, I should say. One is straightforward pension obligation bond, and the other is like a certificate of participation or a leased revenue deal. You can structure to pay the liability with either of those. Once you issue pension obligation bonds, the dollar amount, whatever you issue, let's say hypothetically you guys decide to do 35 million. Once your transaction closes, the money doesn't go to the city. It goes directly to Calpers. And the risk is if you give Calpers $35 million, the timing of when they invest those monies, what could happen in the market? Does it go down? Do they lose the money? And so market timing matters in terms of understanding the risk. And that is a real risk. So we've seen other clients that we've worked with that want to look at their pension liability today. We go back and look in their profile and find they issued pension obligation bonds in a period where the stock market or investments were very volatile and subject to declines and they made deposits that lost them a little bit of money. And so we have a variety of strategies to help manage and look at that risk. We're able to run a variety of different scenarios for our clients so they can understand what happens if CalPERS has a return below 7%. In fact, we can run it all the way down to 4%. What happens if CalPERS has one loss in a year? What takes effect? So based on our modeling and the adjustments that CalPERS has made, CalPERS would have to have basically about a 20+% loss in a single year, in the first year of you issuing pension bonds, for you to actually lose money. If it just goes down a little bit in discount rate, you still be favorable in the long term. And that's something that we present as part of your decision making going forward. We run those scenarios for our clients. We also run something that's referred to as a Monte Carlo simulation. And basically what that does is runs up, thousands of options on what could happen with your money to kind of get an average outcome. And it goes in through a score of basically 100 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. And most of these that we've run, if not all of them, have been somewhere in the high 70% or high 80% under that simulation. And that's important to note. What that means is if you were to make your CalPERS payments as outlined in that previous slide, up from 3.6 to 5.1 and back down again, you would fully fund your policy or your plan, and you would have given them $80 million. The Monte Carlo simulation looks at what happens if you do that, or you send CalPERS the money lump sum. That 80% number or success number represents that more likely than not, 80% of the time you'll have more money in your plan if you issue pension bonds than if you paid over time. The reason being is you have a longer time to amortize those monies in the plan, and overall the plan has shown growth over time. So if you put the money in earlier, the stock market's going to go up and down, but at the end of the day, at the end of the 20 years, there's an 80% chance you'll have more money in your plan than if you just made the regular payments. So that's something that we're able to run as well. Next slide, please, Manuel. So evaluating the outcomes of POBs is certainly important. As your city manager pointed out, 7% versus 3.5%. That's simply what's driving a lot of this interest. We are in a historical low taxable interest rate environment. I think that's the significant part of what's driving this. And there's a interest in pension bonds. We've not had a problem with investors or with banks having interest in working with us and our clients to sell the bonds. We can look at fixed dollar UAL payments as opposed to what you see spiking payments over time. You already have the existing liability in your balance sheet. We can certainly address that and pay it down over a quicker period of time. You will get actual budget savings from the issuance of bonds. And obviously the money goes into your plan. Now, how we plan to measure all this stuff is market timing risk. I had a call with CalPERS last week. They've told me that their investment returns look good for this year so far. We've seen volatility in the market, but CalPERS has done fairly well. You could decide that you don't want to fund all of your liability. A lot of cities have focused on one part of their liability, specifically the safety plan. It's all general fund, and we've had some agencies decide to do that. We've had agencies decide to not issue 100% of their liability. Again, to mitigate risk, they'll do 75, 80, 90%. And then obviously, the market timing risk applies to all the money, whether it's the $109 million you have at CalPERS today, or any additional monies that you'll give them from your annual UAL payments or in lump sum. The market risk does still remain there. What you want to avoid, though, if you knowingly can do so, is making a deposit at CalPERS at a time where you feel that there's a lot of risk in doing so. Now, I pointed out a little bit earlier the difference between pension obligation bonds and certificates of participation as two approaches. If you issue certificates of participation to fund your liability, those monies you actually can hold. It's a different process to chase down the debt and to pay it off. But in that case, you could actually hold the money and decide when you want to send the money to CalPERS. Now, you're going to have an interest carry cost for holding it. But if you feel like the market's volatile and you want to time your deposits, that is the way to do it. Next slide, please, Manuel. One more, please. So with each of our relationships with our clients and moving forward with their pension liability financings, we recommend that they adopt a pension funding plan or a pension funding policy. It is something that the rating agencies look favorable to. And one of the more common questions we get from labor groups and or elected officials is, well, now that we paid this off, how do we ensure we don't get back to this position again? And so really the purpose of the pension policy is to look at ways that the cities can manage their pension liabilities going forward on an active basis. Calpers, I think the changes they've made with Pepper and other things do allow you to manage your pension liability on an active basis, as opposed to where things used to be basically controlled by your payroll. Now it's a fixed dollar amount. Now you can send them additional payments. They wouldn't allow that before. And there is ways to pay things down with the strategies we've talked about. You can look at how you use your savings. We talked about, I think we, in one of the opening slides, we referred to as recycled savings. That basically means taking the savings from your interest rate difference, 7% to 3.5%, putting that money back into your pension plan to pay it down faster, or to set the money aside or a portion of it aside for liabilities. I assure you, you will have new liabilities at some point in the future. That's the way the plans have worked historically. They have great periods where their interest rates and returns are significant and helpful to the plan. But we have a cyclical economy somewhat in California that goes through recessionary periods. We had a very deep one not too long ago with the Great Recession that affected all the plans and created tremendous liabilities. And so we know over time you're gonna have good times and bad times with your liabilities, and having money set aside to ensure you're able to smooth out that process, continue to deliver service, remain sustainable is really what the policy is intended to do. In these policies, we include a process of how to manage that liability with strategies. I mentioned a couple of them a little bit earlier. A lot of these strategies continue to work year after year as long as they're monitored. And then we also work with you to determine what to do with budgetary savings and to model what the best outcome would be to paying down any other liabilities or chasing down other options that the council may have as priorities. Next slide, please, Manuel. There is a process that's required before you issue pension obligation bonds. It's a validation process. Because voter approval is not required for pension obligation bonds, you basically go to court to get a court validation. Your city attorney probably knows this a lot better than I do, but basically it's to ensure that under the state refunding law that you can issue pension bonds to pay your current liability. So your liability being a debt, and the refunding law allowing you to take that debt and to finance it. And that's basically what you are validating. As I mentioned, there is an alternative to this process. The validation process, as we'll discuss in a moment, can be a little bit lengthy. It can be challenged by individuals that don't believe or feel that pension bonds are something the city should pursue. There have been a couple of pension bonds that have been challenged in court. Most of them have not. But there have been a few. One way around that process would be to look at issuing certificates of participation or lease revenue bonds. Under this structure, however, you are required to pledge assets. So if you have, let's say hypothetically, you want to issue $30, $40 million worth of pension bonds or lease revenue bonds, you'd have to identify assets worth that amount of money and use those as collateral. Once you do that, however, those assets are not available for other financings that you may want to have for park improvements, any type of public facility improvements where finance is required. Those assets may not be available. And so we really want to make sure that if that's the choice that our clients want to make, that they have a robust set of assets to make sure that while these pension bonds remain outstanding, they aren't limiting their ability to address other capital needs that may be 5-10 years down the road. If you've had a validation process, you don't need to go through it again. I don't believe the city has been through this process before, so this would be the first time for you. You do have to go through the Superior Court in your county, so Los Angeles County. It does not obligate you to issue bonds. And so a lot of our clients, what they're doing to put pension bonds or pension financing in their toolbox, they're making the decision to validate and not always with the intent of issuing debt right away or once the validation is done, rather to make that choice available if they want to. It's been our experience, however, everyone that's validated has moved forward pretty close to right after validation, again, because of the low interest rate environment. The requirements also suggest that there's a series of legal documents. So I think one of the staff recommendations in your staff report today would be to move forward validation. That process requires the city to engage a bond counsel firm that will draft the documents. There are several documents that the council will approve, and they'll take the city through the validation process. Now, the validation process does have an expense to it. If you pay the attorneys to take you through it, it's about $20,000 to $25,000. It is a non-contingent expense. So what that means is if the city decides to validate but not issue bonds, it will pay the bond counsel the fees for validation. If you decide to move forward with bonds after validation, those costs are covered as part of the financing or included ultimately in the closing of the transaction. So the commitment to validate is really a commitment of about $25,000 of resources. Decision to move forward can be made, after validation is completed immediately or anytime thereafter. Once you're validated indefinitely until you issue the bonds for which you've been validated for. There are, however, some occasions, I don't think you would need it here, but there are some agencies that have validations that allow them to issue additional pension obligation bonds down the road. We've seen that recently with the city of Monterey Park, who we helped. They were validated, issued bonds about 15, 20 years ago, and their court documents allowed them to issue a second tranche of pension obligation bonds without having to go back through that process. Once you complete or authorize the validation process, the council will have lots of opportunity to engage with consultants that work on the transaction if you decide to go forward. Again, it's not a commitment to issue the bonds. That commitment comes later on when other documents are created, specifically a preliminary official statement, which is like a prospectus, basically outlines the city's credit in a document that investors get to look at and review. So that would have to come back to you. You'd have to prove that. There's other resolutions. There's also interest rate assumptions, savings assumptions that the council must bless before we go forward. So you can say yes to the validation process without saying yes to the issuance of bonds and without the commitment of doing so. So that is obviously up to your discretion. And the process for validation, during COVID, depending on the county and how backed up they are, I mean, it could take 4 to 6 months. We've seen that in some counties. Things are loosening up a little bit now. So we're thinking maybe now 100 days is probably about right, but we've seen some go a lot faster. So once you jump into that process, we start monitoring the validation process, provide staff updates on where we are in that process. And at the direction of staff, we either start working on a structure of a new transaction, or we wait for the process to end and then come back and present to the council where we are with the market. Once your validation is done, if you decide to completely bifurcate the steps, validation being step 1, financing being step 2, the validation process, again, 100 days or more, depending on COVID delays. The financing process is probably another 70 to 90 days from that point. You can work them concurrently to mitigate the time of the entire transaction if you choose to do so. Next slide, please, Manny. This is just our disclosure that we have in our presentation that we're required to do. Basically just says that we are providing you advice as demonstrated through the analysis, but not a requirement to take action. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you for the presentation. Do I have any questions from the council?
Mayor Barson, if I may just make a comment here. So I think there's a lot of detailed information there. A lot of it, it's a lot of information just to sort of soak in and hear about. But I think the number, and not to make it simple, too simple, but you see that there's an opportunity there for over $600,000 in budgetary savings by what's a pretty technical, highly regulated financial transaction. But this is a transaction that, I'm confident that with the help of consultants and with the staff that we have there and our expertise that we could get such a transaction done. So what we're really doing is looking for authority from the council to move forward to solicit proposals from qualified firms to get this process going. So if the council were to make a motion to authorize us to commence this process, to solicit proposals for qualified firms, then we would do so, and we come back to council as those proposals come in, and we review the proposals and recommend contractors. And we'd be moving pretty quick on this as the financial markets, can move pretty swift and can move for us or against us. So staff recommendation is approval. I also like to thank Michael Bush for that detailed presentation. Thank you, Mayor Barcena.
Thank you, City Manager. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask for a motion for this item. Is there a motion anywhere?
I'd like to go ahead and motion to approve and continue to the next step.
Okay,
I'll
we have,
second.
we have a motion by Council Member Flores and a motion and a second by Council Member Cortez. I'll take it to a roll call. Councilmember Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
and yes for myself, so motion carries.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Thank you
We'll
for the
chat
opportunity to
later. I
present
have
to you.
some questions, but I'm sure you can clean that up in very quickly. So thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very thorough and I appreciate it.
Anytime.
We're gonna take a 5-minute recess, and we'll be right back. Thank you. All right, we're back from break at 7:52. And now we are going to item number 17. City Manager, can you please announce discussion item 17?
Thanks again, Mayor Barsana. Item number 17 is a state legislative update regarding to planning and housing bills. I will turn it over first to our Community Development Director, Gus Relma, and then he may turn it over as well. Go ahead, Gus.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Am I okay with the mute? Yes. Our Planning Commission City Attorney ended up giving a presentation to the Planning Commission this past month, and it was on the same topic, legislative update on housing bills. So we wanted to make sure that the council was also updated on these very important bills. They are going to require the city to come in and do some code amendments in the future. We will be needing to, I'm sorry, you're able to hear me? Yes, okay. We are going to be needing to make some changes. So I'll turn it over to our Planning Commission Assistant City Attorney to give you an update.
Good evening, Mayor Barsana and council members. My name is Lloyd Pilchin. I'm Rick's colleague at your city attorney's office. Okay, I'll make this quick. So we have several new laws coming that are taking effect, and they're broadly about two topics: the housing crisis, which the legislature has decided is a policy imperative to increase density and create more housing. And the second topic that these address is the environment. The first one is probably the most important law and the biggest change to zoning law in a long time. Senate Bill 9 is basically, we're referring to it as the end of the single family zone. So it used to be that your minimum lot size, 5,000 square foot lot, you could build one home on. Then recently we had the accessory dwelling unit law, the ADU law, that allowed you to put a unit in, for example, your garage and rent that unit, but you couldn't sell it because you still had to have one lot. Now you can split your 5,000 square foot lot in half and you can sell that unit. More than that, each of the two lots that are now the two halves of your minimum square foot lot size, each can have its own ADU. So what used to be a single family zone with one house on it can now have 4 units. And this is a state mandate, and many of these approvals are ministerial, meaning that the Planning Commission doesn't get to have discretion to approve them or not approve them. If they meet the requirements, it will have to be approved over the counter. So that's the big change is SB 9. SB 10 is just it's not a mandate. It allows the city, if it wants to allow as much as 10 units on a single family lot. That's not a requirement. That's it's permissive. Cities are allowed to do that if they want. Okay, the next one, AB Assembly Bill 1398, is all about the housing element. And on this point, the city is right on track. You will have a new housing element coming to you early next year. This law just simply says that zoning must be consistent with the new housing element. So if there are zone changes that need to be followed up in order to comply with the new housing element, there's a short time frame in which that can be done. Now, Gus and I have talked, your development director, Gus Romo, and I have spoken that, many of these timing mandates are very aggressive, and there are many cities in the state that are just going to have great difficulty meeting these requirements. So the law does not specify a particular penalty, but your planning division, your community development department will be working with the state housing community development to get extensions and to stay in communication with them so that as many other cities will be doing, so that they can continue to update you on how things are moving forward. basically the way it works is cities need money to hire a consultant to prepare new elements of the general plan and to advise on zone changes. These things take money, and cities often rely on grant money for that. SB 330 is amendments to what's called the permit streamlining. That's a long-standing law that it's all about making sure that when a developer submits an application, that it gets acted on in a timely manner. So that law exists, but now there's a couple amendments to that law that are quite new. One of them is that for certain housing developments, as soon as the application is in and is complete, it locks in the development standards. It always used to be in California that you couldn't lock in your development standards until late in the approval process. That means that you could submit an application, or while it was going through the pipeline, the city could change its zoning code and change the rules. But again, in order to create more housing and to be more developer friendly, this law it locks in the rules early on. Okay, now we move to the environmental laws. SB 1000 passed a few years ago, but the deadline is coming up for this. Is about an issue called environmental justice. That's an aspect of environmentalism. Basically, environmental justice is about where factories and things that are that have pollution and that are harmful to people who live nearby them, where are they sited? Where do they get to be? So environmental justice is the movement that points out that oftentimes they are sited or built in poor communities that don't complain about them or don't have the resources to hire lawyers to fight them. So this is the concept of environmental justice says we have to be conscious of this rather than just allowing. So the law SB 1000 says that every city's general plan has to have an environmental justice element that examines, analyzes how this issue is affecting its own community. SB 379 is another environmental one. It requires the city's general plan safety element to address climate change adaptation. And finally, building on that last law, SB 1035 requires cities to periodically review and, if necessary, update their safety element, again, to address climate change. So again, these are the housing element is coming to you next year, but many of these others, it's going to be difficult for the city to comply with, and it's going to require grant money, and your staff will be working with the state agencies to inform them and to get extensions and to do our best to get it done. And Gus and I are available to answer any questions.
Okay, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here today. Do I have any questions from the council?
I think your mic is off. I think your mic is off.
Motion to receive and file? Anyone?
Moved
go ahead.
Cortez.
Second, Flores.
A motion by Cortez, second by Councilmember Flores. Taking it to a vote, Councilmember Chavez,
Yes.
Cortez,
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
and yes for myself, so motion to receive and file, and Now going to our city council reorganization, item 18, city manager. Can you please cover that item?
Thank you, Mayor Barcena. Before we move on with the nomination process, I'd like to just take a moment to recognize the mayor, Marco Barcena, and Mayor Pro Tem Maria Pulido. We've received a significant number of certificates of recognition for both of you. A plaque from the City Council, recognition from Congresswoman Roybal Allard, from State Senator Lena Gonzalez, from Assembly Member Christina Garcia, from LA County Supervisor Hilda Solis, from the City Council of Cudahy, Montebello, and Southgate. I'd like to take a moment at this time to just provide a plaque to you in appreciation from the rest of your council member for Mayor Barcena and for Mayor Pro Tem Pulido, and then also ask the mayor if there is anything you would like to say before we move on with the process as well. I'll take a minute here to hand these plaques to you.
Thank you. Show this here. Well, first of all, I actually would like to hand it over to Mayor Pro Tem. She'd like to speak first if she has a few words. No? Okay. I just want to say that this is a very sharp object, so I'm glad no one got hurt in the process of bringing it here. But it's also very nice, so thank you, I appreciate it. And I want to really take a moment to thank staff. I encourage everyone to go watch the State of the City. We worked very hard on trying to create like a painting of everything that we did in 2021 during my mayorship, and I want to emphasize the fact that this is all staff doing the hard work, the heavy lifting. The Mayor Pro Tem said the other day at one of our employee recognitions that they do all the work and we take all the credit. And there's a lot of truth to it. It's not entirely true, but there's a lot of truth to that. We do work very hard to make sure that we give our residents the results that they elected us to achieve. And I feel like there were a lot of things that needed to get done this year. A lot of them got done. Some other ones are in the process. Not everything was successful, but the majority of things were a success. But I think that's okay because all the effort that goes forward, you can't guarantee that everything is going to go perfect all the time. And I think the moment that you don't experience lessons or small failures here and there, I think there's something wrong there. When everything is just perfect, there's probably a lack of initiative, there's probably a lack of innovation, there's probably a lack of progression. So I think that we're doing good as a city, thanks to the efforts of the entire council, thanks to the efforts of our employees. And I just want to say that it was my privilege to be mayor this year, and that I'm going to continue to support whoever is next, and that I feel that the city is in a great position, and I can't wait to see what's coming our way, not only for the following year, but 5 years down the line. I think we have a bright future, and that's all thanks to everyone here. So thank you all for that. All right, and I believe I'll give you another chance, Maria, if you don't want to, if you don't have anything to say. Going once, going twice, okay. So now we are actually moving on to item number 18, which is the city reorg, and city manager, take it away.
Thanks again, Mayor Barcena. As we move forward, just from the city manager perspective and from the staff perspective, I just want to thank again one last time the mayor and the Mayor Pro Tem for all their support during the year. during the years and the council support as well. But I've spent a lot of time with the mayor and the mayor pro tem in meetings and really appreciate the level of time, effort, concern that the mayor and the mayor pro tem have shown over the last year. Very appreciative. It's been very challenging. And as the mayor stated, there's been some failures, but there's been learning opportunities and I think growth definitely for me and I think for the whole staff as well. So I thank again the mayor and the mayor pro tem. Moving forward to the item, the Bell Gardens Municipal Code specifies that in odd number years when there are not elections, that the reorganization occur at the first meeting of December. And we are here at this point in time. I will read a little bit here just to state that the government code states that the mayor shall preside at the meetings of the council. If he or she is absent or unable to act, the mayor pro tem shall serve as the mayor until the mayor returns or is able to act. The mayor pro tem has all the powers and duties of the mayor according to municipal code at this time. The council shall organize and select the mayor and mayor pro tem. I'll turn it over to Mayor Barcena at this time.
Thank you, City Manager. At this point, I will take nominations for the position of mayor. And these are,
I'd like to
Mayor.
go ahead and make a nomination to nominate Maria Pulido for mayor.
I'll second that motion.
okay, so we're gonna take that nomination. I believe there are no other nominations, correct? Okay. So we do have a second now. And I think that satisfies our next requirement. So I will go ahead and take it to vote. Councilmember Chavez.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Cortez.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Flores.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido.
Yes.
Okay, and yes for myself, so motion carries and congratulations to Mayor Pulido. And now I will take nominations for the position of Mayor Pro Tem.
I would like to nominate Councilmember Chavez for the position of Mayor Pro Tem.
Go ahead and second that.
Thank you. So we have a nomination and we have a second. Are there any other nominations? Okay. So I will take it to a roll call and we'll start with Chavez.
Yes.
Thank you, Cortez.
Yes.
Flores,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pulido,
Yes.
or should I say Mayor Pulido at this point? All right, great. So I also vote yes. So that's a unanimous approval for the Mayor Pro Tem, which is Jorge Chavez. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I have a technical question here, and I apologize if I didn't know this in advance. Do we switch right now? Right? Okay. Shit. Yeah. So if you don't have a script, I can hand this one over. Is it the same one? Yeah, the same one. It's the same one. You're good to go.
Yeah, we don't have to.
All right, we don't have to switch. Yeah, but you're in control now, Madam Mayor.
I would say a passing of the gavel, council member Barcena would be appropriate.
Public participation is now open for non-agenda items. Public participation. City Clerk, can you please announce the instructions for the public participation?
Yes, Madam Mayor. The members of the public will now have an opportunity to speak on items not listed on the agenda. Please state your name for the record before addressing your comments to the mayor and council members. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Anyone wishing to make comments may do so at this time by pressing *9. When instructed, press *6 to unmute yourself. Individuals joining us through the Zoom app may request to make a comment using the raise hand feature on Zoom. There are actually no attendees right now. There are no speakers.
Okay. If there's no objection by the city council, I will close public participation. We will now move to council member comments. Councilmember Cortez.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any announcements, just want to congratulate our new mayor. I know you're going to do an amazing job, and also congratulate our outgoing mayor, Barcena. You did a fantastic job this past year. You had a lot of conviction in improving our city, and I think that really and truly shows. You brought amazing improvements for our residents, from allocating money from our budget to help those in need, to countless other decisions and items that you put forward. So I do want to congratulate you on a job well done, and I look forward to seeing the new leadership and the improvements that we're going to have in our city.
Councilmember Flores.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Well, before I continue, congratulations. I'm really excited, to be a part of this reorg, and I'm really happy with the results. But before I get into any of that, I'd like to, is somebody's mic on? There's like a big echo. Oh, echo. Just to touch on a few things. We had yesterday, right, the 12th, the passing of a very important and just phenomenal worldwide legend of Vicente Fernandez, who passed away. As a Jalisciense myself, a proud Tapatia, he was the pride and joy of our state and the pride of joy of our country. And it was a very, very sad day. I have to say that I know there was tears that were shed across, everywhere. And it was a really, really sad day. And I just can't believe that we're here. But, my condolences go out to the Fernandez family and to everybody who's singing his songs today. I raise a glass to you. Cheers. And y volver. And I just want to go ahead and acknowledge again our Parks and Rec and our Governor Newsom for granting us those $4 million. It makes a huge difference for our community. And with the pool coming in, it literally is that icing on the cake for us. So thank you so much to Governor Newsom for actively sending funds to our community and to our Parks and Rec, for being on top of that and making sure that when these funds become available, that we process all the necessary paperwork so that we are qualifying of that. I also want to invite all of you to please get involved with the redistricting. There's a lot of stuff going on right now with our assembly, our Senate, our congressional. A lot of our districts are being threatened, and there's just not enough voices that are being heard from our community. So I invite you to please participate, to all the people that are both in this room and at home watching this meeting. And I just want to say that this is the power of unity. I'm really, really happy to be here today, just because this is, I feel like, what partnership and unity and following structure looks like. It's no secret that the last couple of years, this dais has shown some type of turmoil, and I'm just confident that we're going to lead differently with this new leadership, and that we're going to have one heart and one mind and make sure that we are protecting and serving all of our residents, and that we are going in this thinking that our unity really does reflect on how people are going to look at their government. And if they're going to believe in their government, it only works if we can win their hearts over, and if not that, then their respect by working with one another. So I'm really happy with that, and I really have a lot of hope and faith that we will go into the correct direction, and that this year will be filled with a lot of new activities and resources as the pandemic is ending, that more activity comes into our community, and that we're more active, and that our community feels seen, and that they feel the power of us together. And it is honestly a pleasure to be here with mostly women and now a female mayor. So that's always a big plus for us. So with that said, I just want to say Merry Christmas to everyone. I don't think we'll see you again for the rest of the month, right? Yeah, this is the last meeting. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Please stay safe and stay warm. And remember to be kind to one another. That is all for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Barcena.
I just want to say congratulations again to Mayor Pro Tem Jorge Chavez and Mayor Maria Pulido. I'm expecting a lot from you guys, and I think that you will be able to deliver it. Remember that I'm here if you guys need anything. I feel like Councilmember Flores said, I think we do work better together. I feel that there are so many things that we can learn from each other, no matter in which direction you look. You learn a lot of hard lessons, easy lessons, useful lessons, all kinds of lessons. So I want to make myself available to you guys. If you guys need any sort of help, if you have ideas, I'm here to work and I'm here to get things done. So just keep that in mind. And my door's always open for you guys. All right. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Chavez.
I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to the council. Truly appreciate the opportunity to serve as MPT this year. And I look forward to working with every single one of you, including our mayor, Mayor Pulido. Truly an honor and a privilege to be here. And we're Team Bell Gardens, right? We will always be Team Bell Gardens, right? And let's stick with that. And let's continue moving forward with that. So moving forward, 2022 got a lot of things in store for all of us, but let's not forget, we're Team Bell Gardens. Thank you to Mike, thank you to staff, thank you to all the directors, thank you to Mayor Pulido, thank you to outgoing Mayor Barcena for all the work that he did this last year. And yeah, let's get to work again. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I think those are the shortest comments we've ever heard from Chavez. Tonight was a night that you could have just gone long, but yeah.
Now we know we have to do.
He's probably sick. I just want to thank all of you for this tremendous opportunity. As you all know, I've been a resident of Bell Gardens since I was 7, so I really do love our community. And I'm ready to work and continue to collaborate with each other and with all of you. I know that there's a bit of extra responsibility with being mayor, but I think to me, it's just the title. I think that we continue to work with each other at the same capacity, whether we're council members, mayor pro tem, mayor. It's still a great responsibility, and we owe it to our community, to our residents, to our business partners, and anybody that really crosses through the city. So regardless of what title we have, our voice is equal. And I'm looking forward to this year, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we'll see you next year. Thank you so much. And if there's no objection by the City Council, I will now adjourn the City Council meeting at 8:19 p.m.